Now, for those unaware, a general election was called in the UK seemingly out of nowhere by the current oligarch occupying 10 Downing Street, Rishi Sunak, the leader of the unpopular British Conservative Party. Sunak has been an unelected PM since the Conservative Thatcherite acolytes chose Liz Truss to become a leader of the Tory party, and thus Prime Minister for a disastrous short time. Since the previous general election that was plagued with smears of anti-Semitism against the Labour Party candidate Jeremy Corbyn, led by the Zionist lobby and their oligarch media allies. Since that time, the people of the UK have been plagued with a scandalous Tory government, with sketchy leadership, feckless governance, and a clear mission to inflict more misery on the population through a cruel austerity programme in the wake of a global pandemic, all the while obsessing over small boats crossing the English Channel and devising gimmick policies like the Rwanda bill, which violate human rights. Much like the corporate arena, investments have been pulled from infrastructure projects while roads and pavements are crumbling, littered with enough potholes that Britain could be mistaken for being a victim of a bombing campaign. If you want a perfect symbolic representation of Tory rule, look no further than the former nationalised waterworks that have been transformed into foreign-owned privatised water companies pumping raw sewage into streams, brooks, rivers, canals and our seas. The Tories have enabled a culture of tax cuts for the greedy, short-sighted super-rich, taking from the system and not investing back into it. Even with the expected political change, there is no real optimism of the situation changing very much. While the Tory clown show commenced, the British establishment have been busy grooming and preparing the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, for his tenure as Prime Minister. Since Sunak's announcement of a general election, I've noticed that Nigel Farage has been injected into the fray. The mainstream media were posting images like this to the website. Nigel Farage isn't even an MP, although he is expected to win in Clacton with the assistance of the Labour Party, who have ordered their candidate to abandon their campaign. He has a political party, Reform UK, that has 0 seats in the House of Commons. Those simple facts show that Reform UK are a fringe party, not even in the top 5 political parties in the United Kingdom. So that should be a red flag to anyone with any political acumen.
I think he is the foremost political communicator of our time, even better, I'd say, than Boris Johnson. And there's a simpleness about his platform. He's not interested in the details of lots of policies. He probably hasn't even read the Reform Party manifesto. He certainly admitted in the past to not having read his party's manifesto. He concentrates on a few issues, and he has a real feel for public opinion, which is, again, a rare quality. Tony Blair had it, Rupert Murdoch has it, and Nigel Farage certainly has it.
I apologise for subjecting you to that verbal fellatio performed by Farage fangirl Michael Crick on Times Radio. What Crick fails to mention is that he is a problematic figure himself, as he was a long-term political editor at the BBC, during which time Nigel Farage appeared to be the most frequent guest on Question Time, BBC's main political platform. This platformed Farage and injected him into the mainstream political realm and gave him some legitimacy. Farage likes to play like he doesn't know what is going on with the BBC and panders to his followers with little stunts like this. So the BBC played a key role in popularising him. With that in mind, you'd not be surprised that Crick authored a biography of Nigel Farage. Crick profits from selling a book about a figure he helped to popularise. Since leaving BBC, Crick has been a contributor to and guest on GB News. More on them later. Another thing that Crick fails to mention is the massive influence Murdoch, a foreign oligarch with a global media empire, has on the general public and the political influence he has. One of the main promoters of Brexit was Rupert Murdoch, who's quoted as saying, "When I go to Downing Street, they do what I say. When I go to Brussels, they take no notice." Murdoch, for a long time, smartly promoted Euroscepticism in a way to pander to a British consumer base, and in doing so has been able to wrap his foreign-owned British-based media corporations in the Union Jack and promote his own brand of a, quote, British identity to disguise his real interests, and that is profitability of his empire, its growth, influence, and his power. Peter Oborne explains Murdoch's influence in politics and the failure to combat it here.
You have to trace the history of this. Murdoch became super powerful under Blair. Thatcher kept him at arm's length. And in my view, for instance, she went down to the Sun once, I think, talked to once, I think. And this decision by the Blair government, incoming Blair government in 1997, to fly all the way to Queensland and sort of pay obeisance, basically, doff their cap to Murdoch in 96, I think it was, attending a meeting of News Corps in crazy. And then if you look at the period after that, the unlimited access given to Murdoch executives in Downing Street, or Murdoch whenever he wanted to go, this created a new kind of politics. I document quite a lot of it in my book on Alistair Campbell, by the way, and it was new. John Major had not tolerated this, and that's one of the reasons they set out destroying him, I suspect, because he wouldn't play their game. And so you got something very new with Blair, which was then, of course, adopted by Cameron, and I can explain to you how that happened too. Which was something very new emerges, where the Parliament is effectively replaced by the media in 1997. The conventional role played by Parliament, i.e. where announcements are made on the floor of the House, they go to the front page of the Sun rather than made in the Commons, and a series of pathetic speakers have allowed that to happen. The government is accountable to the papers more than to their own MPs, who. The figure at this moment in history of the chief whip is massively diminished. If you look back to those early TV dramas about politics, the big man is the chief whip. Suddenly, the big man becomes the press guy, the Alistair Campbell or whoever it is. Now, that becomes the new model of it. They are taken into government. Suddenly you get the press, the editors sitting alongside cabinet. A fantastic moment in early New Labour, when what's her name? Rebecca Brooks, I think. She's the editor of the Sun. She sits next to the cabinet in party conference speeches. She doesn't sit with the journalists. She's brought inside. And the News International parties become sort of must attend. Obviously, Cameron, to do him justice, tried to resist this. When he first appeared, but it led to political disaster. He had an emergency moment in 2007 when his poll rankings collapsed, and he solves it by bringing in Coulson, the former editor of the News of the World, as his press advisor, and that changes everything. But he constructs policy in order to please the Murdoch press, rather than to do the conservative thing. I mean, one classic example of this is treatment of Muslims. Policy towards Muslims until 2007 was, just look at what Cameron was saying and doing. He was saying we shouldn't use words like Islamism. We should treat the Muslim community with great respect. Saeed Abbasi was made a cabinet minister, a shadow cabinet minister, and then suddenly you get Coulson, and it gets harder. You get Murdoch. I don't want to attribute him. Coulson is the symbol of all this. You get it's done for Murdoch, and they start to turn on on minorities. Gove is given control, Michael Gove, who's really it's a very interesting phenomenon. Gove, he's absolute disaster from start to finish as a cabinet minister, but he always gets written up as absolutely brilliant. When you saw the political obituaries written him, he was the minister for Murdoch, right? That's all he was really, and so you can't do anything wrong. You're just written up as a genius, because whatever he does is regarded with enormous acclaim. And so that is what happened. A new structure was created for British politics and the relationship with the media. And again, I return to Baldwin. They tried it out in early 1930s when the big media guys, Beaverbrook, tried basically to take over politics. And Baldwin made this, and they formed a new political party and tried to run against the Conservative Party. And Baldwin made his famous speech, power without responsibility is the prerogative of the harlot, that famous speech. And he said, clear out, get out of the way. Another reason why Churchill hated Baldwin, because, of course, Beaverbrook was his mate. But it was a massive moment. And Cameron could have done that. It's fascinating. And you look at missed opportunities in modern politics after the phone hacking. He could have used that to really take on Murdoch, but instead of which he did that, the Tory party did that deal, and, there was never Leveson 2, and obviously they had to respond to the public outrage at, Millie Dowler, but it was sorted through backstairs dealings with the big proprietors.
That's interesting, a genealogy of Tory collapse. And, that alternative timeline of, like you say, the phone hacking inquiry and Cameron maybe not hiring Coulson. I mean, I think that's quite an alluring argument. The point around Murdoch and Gove, maybe my memory doesn't serve me, but I think I'm correct in saying that the first interview with Trump after he became the president was in the Times, conducted by Michael Gove, who's a British politician. He used to be a journalist, but he's
and with Murdoch in the room. Yeah.
Precisely. And I think that was one of those moments where I thought, what on earth is going on?
Exactly. And that was a big moment. We're talking about the movement away from conventional conservatism, Burkean conservatism, to this new, very populist, dangerous, white supremacist conservatism. I'm trying to be very careful with my language. The conservatism of Donald Trump. And Murdoch, of course, was, through Fox News, was a massive figure in bringing about Trump in 2016. And nobody ever could say, all these pompous people who write for the Times, it's not an issue for them. All these, these worthy journalists who express these important thoughts on the column op-eds and so on.
Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, much like Farage, were key figures of the Brexit campaign, a campaign of lies built on immigration and NHS spending promises that were never kept. The comedy of errors, scandal and incompetence which the British public have had to suffer through during Johnson's tenure as Prime Minister were prolonged in part due to the cosy relationship shared with the Murdoch press. This is a video Nigel Farage made at the time Rupert Murdoch stepped down as the head of his media empire.
So the 92-year-old Rupert Murdoch is stepping down as the executive chairman of his media group and becoming emeritus chairman. It means he won't be making the big decisions anymore. This guy's been a giant of media, newspapers, TV, radio, for more than half a century. Remember this about Rupert Murdoch. It was him that pushed Tony Blair into promising a referendum before we joined the euro. Without Rupert Murdoch, we would have joined the euro, and I suspect Brexit would never have happened. And that is his place in British history.
So there you have it. Farage gives a little acknowledgement of Murdoch's role in Brexit, but in no way is that the extent of it. But Farage doesn't want you to know the full extent. You see, Farage owes his entire populist persona and popularisation of two main topics he's piggybacked off of to the Aussie oligarch: Euroscepticism and immigration. Rather ironic, considering Murdoch is an immigrant himself, and he personally doesn't believe the narrative he pushes on gullible consumers. In the clip, Farage acts as if it's a great thing that a media mogul had such political influence over Tony Blair. This is clearly a foreigner interfering in our political system and violates our national security, but the self-anointed British patriot Nigel Farage isn't at all concerned about that. The focus of Murdoch's brand of anti-immigration targets the poor of the immigrants, not the wealthy looters from across the globe, abusing the city of London's offshore tax havens, swanning from country to country in private jets and super yachts. A genius move of Murdoch was using his own brand of anti-immigration hysteria to attack the EU and their immigration laws. Popularising these topics has served multiple purposes for Murdoch, as much of the media's audience are working and middle class, stoking xenophobia and dehumanisation that creates division between people of different ethnic backgrounds and religions, distracting away from the upper class, a tactic that super rich have thrived on. Murdoch's media empire has played a key role in manipulating significant working and middle class Brits to hate poor immigrants, and many have adopted their anti-immigration stance as their chief political cause. Politically, this has fueled and given life to liberal opponents and identity politics, jumped on and backed by corporations as a way of opportunistically marketing themselves as inclusive and trendy. Out of this division emerged the label woke, fueling social policy wedge issues which the corporate media and online grifters gleefully keep in the spotlight in their headlines, articles, stories and videos. Ask yourself, who does this all benefit? Focusing on what is going on in bathrooms and not boardrooms. We want you focused on the bathrooms and not the boardrooms. Focused on the small boats and not the super yachts. The political opportunist Nigel Farage to run for a seat in Parliament. It will be his 8th attempt to win a seat. You see, the great thing for the Murdoch empire and people like Mr. Farage is immigration is constant, and solving the problem in air quotes isn't even in their interest at all. What would they complain about? They're hardly going to start talking about taxing the rich, are they? The never-ending issue makes for a great business model. Murdoch is selling newspapers while selling division, selling xenophobia, pushing readers to the right, with the ultimate goal of making them useful idiots for the oligarchy. By distracting away from serious issues that have much more direct impact on the lives of working and middle class people, such as corporate greed, the super rich, and their parasitic behaviour, haven't received the real scrutiny they deserve, and thus this hasn't been the focal issue it should be to unite the people against the powers that be. In essence, without Murdoch there is no Farage. Deep down Farage knows this, and that video was the best he could do publicly to acknowledge Murdoch and thank him. In 2021, Farage started working for a new TV channel, GB News, as a presenter. With GB News, we see a new media platform backed by a wealthy hedge fund manager, Sir Paul Marshall. Marshall is another billionaire backer of Brexit, and the GB News platform reflects Marshall's worldview. Social media accounts linked to Marshall have promoted a lot of the same xenophobia pushed by figures in the networks I've covered for years. I recall Adam Green covering this arch-Zionist Jewish American woman using the moniker Amy Meck. I can't think of a more blatant example of a Jew agitating European Christians against Muslims. Marshall was a board member of GB News but has recently stepped down to focus on other interests, following news that he is expected to become the new owner of a Telegraph newspaper. It looks like we will have another media mogul in the same vein as Rupert Murdoch, buying up established mainstream media outlets. This may be a sign that GB News hasn't been the success Marshall had hoped for, and he is looking to spread his influence through a well-established platform that the Telegraph has to offer. It isn't a very healthy media landscape when so many media outlets are held in so few hands. One thing of note about GB News is the huge disparity between their TV audience and perceived online social media following. Leading up to this election, we have a similar story, with Reform UK's social media following outperforming all other parties.
England's England, and sometimes I don't even want to be here.
Why's that?
Bad.
Well, it's getting worse.
Too many bloody foreigners. You look around, there's a foreigner. No more England. Might as well name it something else. Hell.
Hell? Why hell?
There's too many foreigners.
Immigrants are jarring.
There we go, what he said.
What's that?
Immigrants are jarring.
What does that mean, jarring?
Annoying. Send them back. You have homeless English people not getting housed, but you have immigrants that come here. They're illegal and they get housed. It's a joke.
So just illegal. You're saying just illegal.
Illegal immigrants.
But legal. I'm talking about. I just asked that.
Yeah,
It's about legal
Yeah,
migrants.
but even if they're legal immigrants, they still shouldn't be put over English people. No, we spend too much tax money on immigrants, and I think that's a joke. And we should worry about our own people before others.
Do you think the political class generally are doing that then?
No. I think the Conservative Party is an absolute joke, and young people in this country don't have a voice, and it makes me sick.
And what? So if you could vote, lads, who would you vote for?
Who would I vote for?
Yeah.
Reform UK, probably.
Yeah. That's the one. Reform UK. Yes, mate. Yes. And get rid of that Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister. Get rid of him.
Water mug.
Yes.
So the media would say that people that vote Reform UK, older, boomers,
Yeah.
racists.
Just Reform UK though.
But hold on one sec. But we've got a young guy, mixed heritage,
Yep.
who's saying Reform UK. So
Yeah.
what are those people wrong about? What attracts you to Reform UK?
Reform UK is that, like, if you're an actual English citizen, you actually have a voice in what happens in this country. But then with a Conservative Party, we don't ever get a voice. So Conservatives just rich people doing what they want to make the most money that they can, which has always been for ages. But Reform UK, actual working class English people have a voice in what happens in the country.
We were talking to some young boys over there a moment ago, and they really surprised me because they said they were into Reform UK.
Yeah, that's what everyone's been saying. Everyone around Chai has been saying that they're like Reform UK, they're very into it. I haven't really heard many people talking about Labour. It's mainly just been Reform UK, like people, like 15, 16 and everything, just been talking
That's
about.
really, that will surprise many people.
Yeah.
That's kind of strange, because most people think Reform voters, older, homeowners, blokes in their 50s and 60s, just saying it's kids in Chichester. Sorry, kids, young adults in Chichester.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of people that are just, if you ask anyone around here, like 15, 16, maybe even young, they'll all just say like it's all about Reform UK. They don't really have an opinion on like Conservatives or Labour, or it's just,
Why though? What's driving them to that opinion?
I don't know, I think it's because TikTok, because there's been a lot of things about Reform UK coming from like other teens in other places. It will be like they'll kind of be influenced by that. And it will be like, because social media has got such an impact and influence on other young people, it will be mainly just because other people are saying Reform UK, it will be everyone else. I think it's kind of just more of a bias thing.
For those familiar with previous work I've done covering networks of power and the use of private intelligence operations via Cambridge Analytica, SCL Group, Psy Group, Wikistrat, and their role in the 2016 US presidential election and Brexit, GBN News and Reform UK seem to have utilised these networks. This election has been dubbed the first, quote, TikTok election, and there has been rather peculiar activity in regards to Reform UK on the TikTok platform. You can read the link to Russian intelligence mentioned in these articles. Previously, Farage's Leave EU Brexit campaign has mired in controversy when key financial backer Aaron Banks was exposed as meeting Russian officials before Brexit, and documents were leaked exposing details of Russia's gold deal offer to Aaron Banks ahead of EU referendum, and revealed exclusive, quote, opportunities not available to others, unquote, and support from a Kremlin bank. Forever the opportunist and Euroskeptic, Farage used the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014 to attack the European Union and NATO, while stating his admiration for Putin. In a recent interview on BBC's Newsnight, Farage tried to revise history and act as if he was Nostradamus, warning that the EU and NATO's actions would lead to Russia invading Ukraine.
Right, I'll tell you what you don't know. I stood up in the European Parliament in 2014 and I said, and I quote, there will be a war in Ukraine. Why did I say that? It was obvious to me that the ever eastward expansion of NATO and the European Union was giving this man a reason to his Russian people to say they're coming for us again and to go to war.
But you were echoing him.
Sorry.
You were echoing him. That's what Putin says.
No. Sorry, I've been saying this actually since the 1990s. Ever since the fall of the wall. But hang on a second. We've provoked this war. It's, of course it's his fault. He's used what
But we provoked the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, and very interestingly, once again, 10 years ago when I predicted this, by the way, I'm the only person in British politics that predicted what would happen.
Nice try by Nostradamus, but Russia had already invaded and annexed Crimea before Farage made any alleged predictions. A key issue that is often avoided is how the City of London and their offshore tax haven empire facilitate and encourage corruption globally, while the wealth of amenities London has to offer attract powerful Russian oligarchs that have moved to wield power politically using their vast wealth. Being a former commodities broker, Farage understands this better than most, and for a man who has spent a small fortune on his own political ambitions, those pandering to the very wealthy can pay dividends. It is rather ironic that a man who likes to present himself as a man of the people, yet his profession and political career are symbolic of what Britain has become, essentially enabling the parasitic financialisation of everything and facilitating the greedy super rich to accumulate more and more wealth at the expense of everybody else. In essence, Farage is a part of the problem. Exploring Farage's professional career, we find the true roots of his political beliefs, or lack of them. Farage has city culture in his blood. His father, Guy Justice Oscar Farage, was a well-known, hard-drinking stockbroker, and his brother Andrew became a broker on the London Metal Exchange. The young Nigel chose to skip university and follow his father into the city after finishing his studies at Dulwich College, a prestigious private school in south-east London. In 1982, he joined Maclean Watson, a traditional English commodities brokerage. Margaret Thatcher's Big Bang deregulation transformed the city almost as soon as Mr. Farage started. But his love affair with Thatcherism began. The smoky offices of Maclean Watson were taken over by Wall Street brokerage Drexel Burnham Lambert, emboldened by Reaganomics deregulation policies just before Mr. Farage entered. While the two brands of neoliberal economics deregulated and cut tax on the wealthy, Drexel Burnham Lambert sought to exploit new opportunities, devising a strategy to trade in high-yield, high-risk junk bonds. This opened the door for vulture capitalist tactics like asset stripping. Thus the lines between aggressive investment strategies and the cannibalisation of corporate assets became blurred. Meanwhile, under Drexel's ownership, Maclean Watson were attempting to corner the tin market. The likes of Michael Milken, Leon Black, Leon Wagner of Goldtree Asset Management, Jerome Kohlberg Jr., Henry Kravitz, and George R. Roberts of KKR Capital, T. Boone Pickett, Ted Turner, and Ira Renert are some of the names that made a fortune by a Drexel through these unscrupulous tactics. While many people at DBL and their early investors reaped huge rewards, ultimately the firm had become a hotbed of get-rich-quick financial fraud schemes, drawing attention from the Security and Exchange Commission. And when the junk bond market began to collapse, the brokerage found themselves in trouble and filed for bankruptcy.
Kevin Salwin of the Wall Street Journal, why did the U.S. government choose to stand by and watch Drexel Burnham collapse?
Well, the point of the government's action, by the government here, we're talking about the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Reserve Board, and the Treasury. Basically what they decided was you can sit back and watch Drexel collapse as long as it does not create a problem throughout the entire junk bond market, throughout the entire financial system. They measured those risks and decided to just let Drexel go as a private corporation.
Does this indicate a new direction for SEC policy?
Well, what it does say is it's about the first time they've said they've gone past the rule too big to fail. I mean, as you've seen through a number of corporations, the government has said, well, it's a little bit too big, it might cause potential shocks, so we'll give them some money, we'll help tie them over. The government in this case decided not to do that, as they haven't done in several other situations, but it's still a fluid situation.
Was the filing for bankruptcy something unexpected on Wall Street, or was this coming for a while?
Well, it had been growing for about the past 6 months. You could really see Drexel's situation deteriorating. The junk bond market was collapsing, which was cutting the value of what Drexel owned as the buyer of last resort of a whole bunch of junk bonds of deals that they had put together. Plus, as that collapsed, the financing business, the deal business, the takeover business, continued to collapse with it. That hurt junk bonds even further, and it sort of became a spiral that went through, and you could sort of see in about the past 2 or 3 weeks that things were getting very bad for Drexel. In addition, as part of Drexel Burnham's settlement last year on criminal charges of securities fraud with the federal government, specifically with the SEC, there was a $650 million settlement that was reached. Only $500 million of that has been paid by Drexel. So there's another $150 million, which it was designed to go to claimants who felt that they had been defrauded by Drexel. And that money hasn't arrived yet. The government will have to stand in line to wait for that.
In the last couple of days, many analysts are hailing this as the end of an era. What does that mean?
Well, the 80s was really a remarkable time for takeovers in this country. What you had was, you had the advent of the corporate raider, the guy who all of a sudden bought a stake in a company, forced it into submission, and funded that with junk bonds. Those were Drexel junk bonds. At this point, you can contend that the takeover boom is over and the junk bond era is over.
We've gone undercover inside Nigel Farage's Reform UK campaign in Clacton, and we recorded extremely offensive language, including this canvasser saying people seeking asylum should be shot.
Over the last few weeks, Farage and Reform UK have received major media attention. Channel 4 decided to carry out some undercover journalism, sending a reporter on the campaign trail posing as a canvasser for Reform UK, recording interactions with fellow canvassers. Following the release of the content recorded, Farage went on the offensive, claiming that this was staged, and the Reform UK canvasser caught in the footage was an actor paid to undermine himself and Reform UK. I think Farage has been spending a bit too much time listening to Alex Jones, coming up with crazy conspiracy theories like this. In conclusion, Farage is a backward-looking toff who romanticises a British empire of bygone eras, another one of Margaret Thatcher's lingering old farts, a shameless self-promoter who never misses an opportunity to do just that. His narcissism relishes media attention and the idea of being a populist leader, a man who wants to be important but doesn't have anything important to say. For Murdoch and the Russians, another useful idiot. Well, I hope you've all been well informed by this video. Please support our work in any way that you can to ensure we can continue to provide information in the public interest. Thanks for watching.